Well, it's interesting because they have not sustained those kinds of casualties in the past. For them to lose 1,000 a day in one day, it would be interesting to know what the cause is. Did they indicate at all what had caused these deaths?
No, it's one of those short, Colonel, it's one of those short summary articles. It's no more than 2 paragraphs. It's like it was written on the fly. Maybe more is to come. If something breaks during the show, we'll pick it up and let you know. You and I discussed a piece in the Financial Times based on writing by reporters who are all over Europe, that NATO's stockpiles are getting low and needing urgent replenishment. How could that be?
Oh, I think that's easily explained. First of all, even in the 1980s, when we were pouring enormous amounts of money into our military establishment, NATO was really conducting business as usual. Now, that was better than what we've seen since the early 1990s, but there was no sense of any imminent danger of war in Europe that justified massive production of equipment or munitions. Once the wall fell, so to say, you see that the German army was rapidly disbanded. The German government simply disarmed itself and fell into the hands of these combination of Greens and leftists who were convinced that that Fukuyama was right, that history had ended and there would be no further conflict.
So NATO, and you've been saying this, NATO is giving arms to Ukraine from its substance, not from its surplus, and its substance, whatever it may need for whatever purpose. The old days, the Russian bear, but whatever purpose, its substance is depleted significantly.
Oh, absolutely. And again, this reinforces another point, that the Europeans did not sign up for a war with Russia. When this whole business began, and I say business, I'm talking about going back to 2014 with the installation of the government that was essentially friendly to us, guided by people like Victoria Nuland and others from Washington. And then the subsequent massive buildup of the Ukrainian army, designed effectively for one purpose, to attack Russia, specifically not just to attack Russia, but to regain control of Crimea. So this was an unambiguously offensive force aimed at Russia. I think the Europeans looked at this and said, well, this won't really go anywhere. The Russians really don't want to fight, and the Russians are no longer armed as they once were. And what we're discovering is that they were not entirely wrong, that the Russian military was hardly prepared for a major war, which is why they ultimately went to the strategic pause, the economy of force. And they went to a war footing. They're now on a war footing. Their factories are running 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. They're not in any danger of running out of ammunitions or equipment or anything else. And they're turning out excellent equipment, brand new equipment in many cases. It's arriving very rapidly at the front. They now have a very large force, and it's getting larger every day. So I think the Europeans just never signed on for this. And the problem we have right now is that we grossly miscalculated on, the Russians. We don't really understand them. We didn't pay any attention to them. We're staring strategic defeat in the face.
Have our supplies been depleted, and
Absolutely.
Are they in need of replenishment, the Americans, to the same extent that NATO's are?
Well, of course, you got to remember that if you look at something like the Javelin, a friend of mine at Raytheon told me that, and this was ultimately posted by Fox News in one of the articles, but a friend at Raytheon said, look, we've gone through almost 7 years of production of Javelins in Ukraine. It takes time to build these missiles, whether it's HIMARS or Raytheon's other products like NASAMS and so forth. All of these missiles are very complex, high-tech weapons. We've gone through our stockpiles very quickly, and we have no surge capacity, none. And that's something people don't understand. But the Russians have managed to very rapidly surge production. And the Europeans are very concerned about it. That's why inside NATO, behind closed doors, people are saying, this can't go on. You've got to end this, Washington. Everyone's at risk. We have nothing left. In fact, the whole tank issue is blowing up in everybody's faces because the tanks are simply not showing up. Suddenly, other European members are reluctant to commit their Leopard tanks. And if I were sitting in their shoes right now, I would feel the same way. Why would I send my armor over there? I might, in their minds, they say, well, once Ukraine is destroyed, we have to be able to defend ourselves. And I think they're right.
To this argument, late last week, General Christopher Cavoli, I don't know if you know him, the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, an American general, was quoted as saying Ukraine's losses are, quote, out of proportion to NATO's expectations. Now, that's consistent with what you're saying, but I'm surprised to hear that from General Cavoli, unless this is the type of leak that's intended to acclimate the public to reality.
That could be. Cavoli is the Supreme Commander, Europe, and what he says is certainly going to have a huge impact in Europe. Most people in the United States won't pay any attention, but everybody in Europe will. And so in that sense, you could be right that he's signaling that this is not going to go on. We cannot sustain this. He's not going to come out and say it, but I think that's his message. Would
someone of General Cavoli's position, an American four-star, but commanding American and foreign troops to the extent that he's commanding them, you can tell me what that means, in Europe, have needed the permission of the State Department or the Defense Department or the West Wing to make a statement that profound?
Absolutely. It would have to have been vetted in the White House as well as with the Office of Secretary of Defense, and I suspect the Secretary of State.
He also used a phrase, and maybe this is military science 101, I don't know. Precision can beat mass. Can you tell us what that means?
Well, I did not necessarily use that.
No, you didn't use it. General Cavoli did.
Yeah. Cavoli is not wrong. What you need, though, is the following. Wars are won and have been won, certainly for the last century plus, by accurate, devastating firepower. Your ability to direct accurate, devastating firepower against the enemy at a place and time and space that makes his position hopeless. Let's put it that way. We have precision. Unfortunately for us, so do the Russians. So do the Chinese. This monopoly that we had for years on precision munitions is gone. Now what the Russians are demonstrating is that they understand that you need both. You want precision munitions, precision missiles, precision rockets, but you want huge quantities of them if you're going to win. So Cavoli is trying to sort of be on both sides of the equation. He said, well, precision can beat mass, yes, under certain circumstances. But if your opponent has precision and mass, probably not. And that's the case with Russia right now.
Wow. You and I also talked about some of the behavior of Ukrainian agents and recruiting officials. I don't know if they're military or not, lowering the conscription age to 16. Now, everywhere in the world, a 16-year-old boy is a boy, not a man, not a fully developed man, and too young for the military, but I guess not too young for Ukraine. You and I shared a video. I don't know how old this kid was, 14 or 15, was literally kidnapped right in front of his mother's eyes and shoved into a military truck. They were just walking down the street. What is this going to do for the morale of the people in Ukraine? Is it common or is it isolated? And has the conscription age in Ukraine, this is almost child abuse, been lowered to 16?
My impression is yes, it has. And there are multiple sources confirming that this is the case. And there's lots of evidence being posted by Ukrainians all the time about the true situation. There are pictures of Ukrainian soldiers that are obviously, 15, 16 years of age. So there's no doubt that this is going on. But I think this is part of the larger picture. The Russians went into this economy of force, and they maximized the effectiveness of their connectivity between space-based and terrestrial-based ISR, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, assets above, and gun systems, rocket systems, missile systems. They've inflicted terrible casualties. Whole year groups of Ukrainian men are dead and are gone, have been annihilated. And at the same time, you have this much smaller population from which to draw on, as I talked about previously. There aren't 37 million people in Ukraine anymore. The areas that Zelensky controls, there are perhaps 18, 19, 20, 21, 22 million, which is roughly the size of the population of the Netherlands. That population is mostly male, I'm told, because lots of old men, women, and children have left the country. But still, the men that are there are not all able. Some of them are in advanced age, and lots of them are children. And so they're in desperation turning to this. This regime is at the end. It really is. But it's not going to give up. It's going to fight to the bitter end, and it's going to sacrifice whatever it can to stay in power.
But when will Joe Biden and Tony Blinken and Lloyd Austin and Jake Sullivan, the people that presumably are making these decisions, recognize what you just said, that the regime is at the end?
I think that for all intents and purposes, that message was delivered weeks ago from the Department of Defense to the White House, and it was rejected. Period.
Well, they're rejecting reality in deference to their political needs. Well, we'll hear that in the State of the Union tonight.
Well, I'm sure you'll hear an entirely erroneous picture. I mean, someone asked me today, how did we end up like this? I said, well, we've had 40 years of Cold War, at the end of which the Soviet Union fell apart and we emerged, if not victorious, then certainly healthy and well, and we avoided global war, which was our goal for 40 years. In just 1 year, we faced defeat in Ukraine through this proxy war, but more important, we're on the threshold of a potential confrontation with Russia, something that we worked for decades to avoid. So I guess the answer to your question, Judge, is it doesn't look good. We're not going to admit failure. No one will say they were wrong.
The Russians love anniversaries. February 24th, of course, is the anniversary of the beginning of this military incursion. From your sources, Colonel, does President Putin have his hundreds of thousands of reinforcements ready to pour in to eastern Ukraine and begin marching and killing and destroying on their way west?
Yes, they're ready. That's why I thought that by now they would have already pulled the string, so to say, and have moved north. But the shaping attacks that have been going on down in southern Ukraine have essentially set the Russians up for multiple axes of advance from the south, up towards Zaporozhye, up through the Bakhmut area, and further east up along the border with Russia. I don't know which one they're going to take. Maybe they'll take them all, but that has worked. Why they have not already attacked, who knows? I mean, one thing I'm sure Sorovikin realizes and Gerasimov realizes is that their strategy of enticing the Ukrainians to attack them relentlessly has worked. Ukraine has been bled white. And they may be saying, well, there's no reason to rush. We can wait another 3 or 4 days. Let's wait for additional ammunition. Let's wait for additional whatever it might be. Remember, logistics is important. And they want to push forward ammunition, medical support, more firepower, all of those kinds of things. And it may be they want to push some more forward. But the truth is they could go right now, and there's not much to stop them from going straight north and on the eastern side all the way to Kiev.
Have you seen any evidence of demoralization amongst the Ukrainian troops because of their vast casualties?
Anecdotally, you go on Telegram and you look at the things that are being posted in Ukrainian by Ukrainians, and yes, there's plenty of evidence for it. There's no question about that. Also, the hatred and hostility is growing for Zelensky, as more and more Ukrainians are blaming him for the
just let me stop you. Is this hatred from the public, Ukrainian public, from the military, or both?
Well, I'm talking primarily about soldiers in the field, but that may also apply to the population. I just don't have access to that in Western Ukraine. I don't know what they think there. But soldier-wise, oh, absolutely. And they're also looking at very corrupt leadership. You know, there are comments coming in all the time. You're stuffing your pockets with cash, you and the generals, your corrupt leaders, and we're dying, by the bushel every other day. I mean, assignment to Bakhmut for the last couple of months has been essentially a death warrant, and everybody knows it.
Not too long ago, maybe 3 or 4 days ago, the former foreign minister of Poland revealed that at one point the Polish government was thinking of, I don't know how they would do this physically, militarily, and legally, partitioning Ukraine and considering the western part of Ukraine, the part largely untouched by the war that includes the capital, Kyiv, as a Polish protectorate, and thereby triggering Article 5, the obligation of all of NATO to defend Poland, if that part of Ukraine, a la Polish protectorate, were attacked by Russia. I mean, this just sounds, to me, crazy. It almost sounds like the justification Hitler used to combine Austria to Germany to protect Austria, even though the only people Austria needed to be protected from was him.
Although most Austrians disagreed, and they were quite happy to join the German state. I think Hitler's a bad comparison. Okay. I think a better comparison would be somebody like Stalin, the man that murdered 16 times the number of people Hitler ever encountered. I think Poland is another state in the region with unfinished business. You've got to go all the way back to the First World War and understand the Second World War was an extension of the First, and then all of the people in the region that were formerly part of Austria-Hungary, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, even the German imperial state or Prussia, all these places fell under Russian domination, Russian communist domination, and everyone was unhappy with it. Everyone hates it, and everyone felt betrayed. The Poles in particular, once they got out from under Soviet occupation and control, always envisioned a time when they would regain their former stature in Europe as a great power. So these kinds of thoughts and strategies have been around forever. The problem is, if they are seriously considering this, and they may be, I mean, it's hard for us to know, but nothing would surprise me. The Poles are romantics to the bitter end. If they think that by moving into Ukraine and claiming that they are acting in the name of NATO and Washington, that'll be the end of NATO. The Europeans will say, you've had it, you're on your own. We're not bankrolling your war to regain your empire against Russia.
Well, we already know that the president of Poland has said his goal would be to claim back Crimea. Now, that is an impossibility, and it's insanity.
Yeah, but you mean Ukrainian president, right?
No, the Polish president.
Oh, he wants to recapture Crimea?
Yes. He wants American troops and his troops and Ukrainian troops to recapture Crimea. This is an impossibility, and I think you'd agree with me. It's insanity for him to say that.
Well, he's obviously on hallucinogenics of some kind that would make him billions of dollars if he could mass produce it. But no, I don't see any evidence for that happening. And again, look at everybody else involved. And I guess you have to make exceptions for people that live in northern Norway that think that might be great, who are on the edge of the West and are totally remote from reality. You may have some of those in England. I don't know. But everybody else on the continent of Europe will walk away from that. There's no chance of that. And that's the end of NATO. People just say, wait a minute. No, we're not joining this war on Russia. Russia is not the Soviet Union.
Is there any chance, no matter what Washington does, that Ukraine can win this war?
Well, of course.
Or that Putin can lose it?
No, of course not. No. Putin isn't going to lose anything. And so, somebody said, well, Putin is weakened and adrift. I said, you mean Joe Biden? They said, no, Putin. I said, no, Joe Biden, not Vladimir Putin. The Russians have a strategy. They know what they're doing. They're methodical. They're deliberate. They're effective. We don't. We never thought through the consequences of our actions. We're all sitting around here in Washington saying, oh, what do we do now? Ukrainians are going to lose. We can't have that. We've got to ship more over to them. What do we do? See, this has been my concern from day one, that then people who are rank amateurs are saying, well, we've got to do something. Maybe we can move into Western Ukraine, just out to Lvov, and set up a safe zone. I don't think it's going to go down very well with the Russians at this point. You can't tell your opponent, you must be humiliated, your state must be dismembered, and your government must be destroyed. Then we will kindly accept your surrender and welcome you into the brotherhood of international globalism or something. But that's effectively what we've been saying. So if you're a Russian right now, you're looking at this and saying, we're just going to keep going until there's nobody left in Ukraine that opposes us. And I'm afraid that's the path they're on. And I don't see any evidence that we're going to try to seriously arrest it.
What will it take, in your mind, for Zelensky to call up Tony Blinken and say, let's start some back channel communications with the Russian foreign minister, because this can't go on much longer? Or is he not the type of rational person to do that? Or is Blinken not the type of person to accept that?
I think Blinken and the president would have to assure Zelensky that he and his inner circle will be flown immediately to Miami or Malibu or somewhere and ensconced in wealthy homes and surroundings and live comfortably for the rest of their lives, in which case he might do that. But otherwise, forget it.
All right. I want to switch gears just a little bit. Colonel, where on the planet is the largest gathering of Chinese intelligence agents outside of China?
Well, the largest concentration, let us say, of intelligence operation, in other words, the biggest operation outside of China,
yes,
with all of the technology and capability, is probably in Mexico. Probably on the outskirts of Mexico City.
And we obviously know at whom and at what those intelligence activities are aimed if they're in Mexico.
And remember, the Soviet Union maintained its largest KGB operation in the world in Mexico because Mexico was very friendly to the Soviets. I mean, these are old issues. Venezuela, Cuba, and Mexico were always pro-communist. They supported the communists in the Spanish Civil War. They supported the Soviets and the communists during the Second World War. They supported them ever since, off and on. So the bottom line is this is why this business about the balloon is so depressing. You know, the balloon is not large enough to carry a serious payload that can communicate anything or collect anything. Somebody said, well, it's the size of 3 school buses. It has to be the size of the Goodyear blimp before you're going to put anything on it that makes any difference. And in the meantime, the Chinese have 300 satellites circling the globe. A third of those have military capability, and several of them constitute China's global positioning system that guides all the missiles and rockets and munitions that they have to their targets.
Do you think
every day, the Chinese satellite constellation monitors where every surface warfare ship in the United States Navy is located? That location information can be rapidly transformed into targeting data. I mean, this is serious. We need to know about it. They don't need a balloon. They have plenty of satellites that will read the names on gravestones in Arlington.
I mean, they
can monitor every conversation they want, including the one between you and me and Jill and Joe Biden.
I mean, they caused 90% of the country to be fixated on a balloon for 4 days, and rumors spread that Joe Biden said shoot it down, and the military overruled him, which I can't imagine happening. I think they hesitated to shoot it down because it was overpopulated areas. Do you think that this balloon was a diversion while something else was happening? Or do you think that the balloon was used by the administration to begin laying the groundwork for hatred of China because Joe wants a war with China over Taiwan?
Well, I think the person that's done the best job of answering this question is Matt Taibbi. He published an article it's called Government by Panic. And I think this Biden administration decided to capitalize on the panic. I think it backfired on them. I think they made a mountain out of a molehill. The issue for us is the intelligence operation in China that obviously has connections to the drug cartels. The fact that Mexico's government is an organized crime facade, which allows these cartels to have access to global finance. The fact that these Chinese are working with the drug cartels and the other criminal elements in the Caribbean basin to push people into our country, thousands of them. Last year, supposedly 20,000 Russians entered the country. I'm trying to find out if anybody has kept track of how many Chinese have come in, because we know large numbers of Chinese girls are brought in that end up in the slave trade, the sexual slave trade. Nobody bothers to bring that up. That's another ugly dimension of this business. But the point is, we already have them in the country. They're in our universities and our laboratories. They're all over the place. They have access to IP. They have access to secrets. What are we doing to protect ourselves? The principal dead horse at the top of the menu is NATO, which continues to be treated as this sacrosanct holy relic. And frankly speaking, internally, it's in complete disarray. It's falling apart. And Americans, I think, sense it, and it's falling apart for all the obvious reasons. You've got economic problems in Europe compounded by all the sanctions imposed on Russia. And while our sanctions have no doubt had some impact, let's be frank, the blowback from the sanctions we've imposed on our European allies has been horrific. And now the Russians have simply announced that they will stop exporting any oil or gas to Germany until further notice. I think that's going to hit a lot of other Europeans. There are problems inside NATO. The Italians were trying to help the Germans with oil and gas, and they too are in a difficult position. And as a result, Draghi has been under severe criticism and is probably going to be forced out. Macron is always been on thin ice, and I think more so now than ever. The problem is that the European peoples are suffering. They're overwhelmed with the immigration problem. We've got 900,000 more Ukrainians pouring in on top of millions of Muslims. Criminality is out of control, and it's not being reported in the press, but the people that live there know what's happening. And there's a sense that why Russia? If you're an Italian or a German and you look at Russia, you say, well, wait a minute. I don't see Russia as evil incarnate, and it doesn't pose a threat to me. And of course, they're right.
So what does President Biden and what do the internationalists around him, Tony Blinken, Secretary of State, and his colleagues in the foreign ministries in Europe, what do they really want NATO to do? I mean, do they want to see NATO troops on the ground in Ukraine, or God forbid in Poland or Estonia, fighting Russian troops because they see this as a means to either degrade the Russian military or get rid of Putin once and for all?
Well, very quick answer on the first one. No one in Europe is interested in committing its forces to a fight with the Russians. They don't see any reason for it. Most of what we call military establishments in Europe are gestures. They're facades. Most of these forces haven't seen any real action against anybody for decades, and they're certainly not up to taking on the Russian military. I mean, remember, the Russian military was this hopelessly inept, incompetent organization that has now withstood 150 days of continuous fighting and crushed the Ukrainian military establishment virtually out of existence, to the point where the Ukrainian government's going to have a tough time just surviving, especially if we stop funding it, which is what we're effectively doing. We've made Ukraine the 51st state. So, no, that first part is nobody wants anything to do with this war, and they know they're not prepared to fight it. As for the rest of it, I think they have went along with Biden's notion that somehow or another this would force Mr. Putin to resign and create a catastrophe in Russia. And they believed it. And now they've gotten an education. Russia has an abundance of resources. It's probably the country in the world that is richest in resources. It's not going to go out of business. And Mr. Putin's popularity ratings are through the roof in Russia. All the Russians see him as defending Russia.
Does there come a time when the American government recognizes that the sanctions were a disaster, that they're hurting American business enterprises? They're not at all deterring Putin. All these Russian oligarchs' yachts that were seized, that was just for show. Yeah. Is there a time when Tony Blinken and company realize we're on the wrong track and we got to get out of this?
I think privately they recognize that they are very much on the wrong track. I think they are taking alarmist phone calls from everywhere from Stockholm to Berlin to Rome, Paris, Madrid. So I think they know that. The problem is they have no plan B. There was never any serious thought given to this whole process. In other words, what was the objective to begin with? No one had a stated objective except to build up the Ukrainian military to not only present a threat to Russia, but to potentially recapture Crimea and harm the Russian military. Well, this is fanciful nonsense that never made any sense. So there is no plan B. So I think they're going to do what you would expect these ideologues to do, which is double down on what they're already doing and then hope against hope that they can outlast this. And I'm not sure that they can. I mean, my recommendation, frankly, is send Nancy Pelosi to Kiev and let her sort it out and just leave her there until it's fixed.
She's threatening to go to all places, to Taiwan. And of course, Beijing is not very happy about that. And they're threatening some severe response to that. We'll talk about Nancy later. Tell me about the actual war. I mean, you don't see it on television anymore. You don't even see it on the front pages of the New York Times. So a couple of questions. Are the Ukrainians holding any ground? Have they won back any ground from the Russians?
No.
Have they actually used American military hardware to attack Russian hardware that is already inside Ukraine? So they're part of Ukraine is bombing another part of Ukraine. And where does Zelensky stand in his stability as the head of the Ukrainian government?
Well, as you know, Zelensky now fired Bakhanov and several other people that were in charge of the security services.
Very senior people.
Yeah, it looks like, the last days of Pompeii. The volcano has erupted, and now he's looking for people to blame for the lava flows that are pouring through the streets. So I think that's part of the problem. I don't think Zelensky is really in charge of a great deal anymore. He's got a force out there. The nationalists are trying to control what's left of it. They're rounding up deserters and either shooting them or forcing them back into action. But the truth is the Ukrainian forces are defeated. They can't regain what's lost. Most of the Russian army has been withdrawn, Judge. I'm talking about the combat force. They have been resting and refitting for the last few weeks. And the fighting in Donbass, which was always the critical portion of this operation, because that's where the Ukrainian forces were located, has been done by Chechen forces, separatist forces that have taken heavy casualties, and mercenaries. Those are the ones backed by massive Russian artillery, regular army artillery, but the regular army combat force that we saw at the beginning, that's been resting and refitting. And I think they're preparing for a massive offensive to finish off this war once and for all. And again, Putin is not interested in crossing the Dnieper River and going into Western Ukraine. But I think he will roll up to the Dnieper to a certain point, and I think he still wants to gain control of Kharkov and Odessa.
All right, but as you point out in your piece, Worshipping Dead Horses, Putin cannot tolerate a free and independent Ukraine, much less a Ukraine that's a member of NATO, because that's a permanent 24/7 threat to Moscow. Am I right?
Well,
have I grasped properly what you wrote in this piece?
Well, not completely. I mean, it can be free and independent as far as he's concerned. It cannot be a puppet of the West. It can't be a platform for attack against him.
Or if it's a member of NATO, he views it as a puppet for the West.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, privately, he's told many people he doesn't care if Ukraine's part of the European Union, could care less. His concern from the very beginning was this massive NATO-trained and equipped army funded largely by us. That's no longer in the picture. But what I'm concerned about, what many Europeans privately are concerned about, I know Berlin is very much so. And remember, Berlin is still the elephant in the room economically. And right next to Berlin is a somewhat smaller elephant called Italy. Both of these states are concerned that what will happen is that we will go back into Ukraine in a subversive way and try to continue to use the Ukrainian people and the rump Ukrainian state as an opportunity to attack and threaten Russia. That's what he doesn't want. And that's what Berlin and Rome don't want. No European wants that. That means literally in our lifetimes, perpetual war to the point
Right.
where finally Putin decides, I don't want to go there. I don't want a border with NATO. Remember, that's one of the things he doesn't want. He doesn't want a border with NATO. He's already got a small one way up north in Estonia. He doesn't want it. So if he can't live with the situation because we make it impossible, well, then, you're forcing his hand again. I think it's time for this to end, and I think the Russians are going to try to do that over the next 30 days.
What are U.S. intelligence, senior members of the intelligence community advising the president? If you know, are they telling him what they think he wants to hear? Or are they telling him what you've just described, that this is a lost cause, it's over with, you better get the hell out and get out now?
Judge, the thing for all of your viewers to keep in mind is that presidents always get the intelligence they want.
Even if it's not truthful.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Because we've lost our sense of proportionality. If you think that you are invulnerable, invincible, and more powerful than everyone else, then you think you can afford to ignore things like the truth when it suits you. This has gotten us into a lot of trouble now, I think, with Russia, because Russia is not Iraq. Russia is not Afghanistan. It's not Libya. And, we're talking now, I listened to the former Secretary of State Pompeo essentially describe the apocalypse, the unification of Russia, China, and Tehran into one iron alliance that we should then set out to crush. I mean, this is the sort of madness that is rampant in Washington, and it presupposes that we are more than we are. In other words, we are not the nation, Judge, as you know, that we were in 1991. Right. 30 years ago, we were a very different country than the country today. And there doesn't seem to be any willingness to admit that and figure out that we've got serious problems here that need our attention. By the way, that's true for Western Europe.
One of the problems that you point out in your piece, Worshipping Dead Horses, you sort of pivot from explaining the uselessness and weakness of NATO into serious problems with the American military, which have been visited upon it by the attitude of current leadership, the Biden administration, with respect to promoting people on the basis of race and gender who are not the most qualified, and establishing the sort of woke atmosphere in the military that people like you and I and people watching us today laugh at when we see happening on college campuses. Now you're telling me and telling your readers that this is happening in the U.S. military. Have they considered the long-term effect of this nonsense?
Yes. Unfortunately, I think they have, and I don't think they understand just how debilitating it is. On the one hand, you have a president who is more warlike, frankly, more aggressive, more bellicose than any president I can remember in my lifetime when he talks about Russia. Not China, but Russia.
Right.
It's unbelievable.
George W. was bellicose, but not with respect to Russia.
Never. Absolutely not. And the key thing here is that while we have all this bellicosity on one side, we're systematically devastating the armed forces on the other side.
Tell us how the armed forces are being systematically devastated.
Well,
the
imagine
American armed forces.
Imagine you have a group of soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. Doesn't matter, but I would think certainly soldiers and Marines. And you announce that the commander has been removed, and you have a new commander. Your new commander is Tiny Tim, with the ukulele in the flowered shirt and the long hair.
This is crazy.
Kind of a uniform on, but
this is crazy, Colonel.
Yeah, but that's essentially what you've got. And says, look. Tiny Tim is one of the finest people we've ever met. And by the way, he's transgender, but you've got to take showers with him because he deserves the opportunity to take showers with you, even though he's transgender. And he may not wear a skirt all the time, but he's wearing one today. You have to tolerate all of this. This is important, and this is what makes us free. This is what we're talking about with diversity. And then the other thing is, I'm sorry, you're not a woman. You're not black. You're something else. You may be white. You may be, Asian, Northeast Asian. We're not interested in you. We don't care how well you have performed. We don't care how many years you've served. We don't care about your performance under fire in combat. We're interested in Sheila over here and moving her forward because we want a new force that is radically different from the one you're in.
All right. When the government, and I realize there's some metaphors and exaggerations in there, but it's largely a summary of what's been happening. When the government does that, does it think in the long term, we don't use a draft anymore. We really need volunteers. We need thousands of volunteers every year. And our base for volunteers are young, virile men who really don't care about woke and don't want wokeness imposed on them, whether the young men are white or black or Hispanic or brown or whatever they may be. My point is, does the Biden administration leadership in the Pentagon recognize that imposing wokeness on the military will have a catastrophic effect on recruiting in the long term?
I think they've already seen it. We're already confronting this catastrophic impact on recruiting. We can't recruit the people that we want. And their attitude is it doesn't make any difference. We'll just drop the standards. We'll start recruiting people that we normally never take into the armed forces, people that are far below the desired IQ levels, people that have criminal records, people that may have serious problems, drug problems or something else. This is already happening. So again, I think they view it as none of these things matter anymore. We live in the era of push-button warfare. Fire a missile. We're still the biggest, most powerful, richest country in the world. We can do pretty much as we want. And the important thing in the backs of their minds is that we're building a force that reflects our leftist ideology and values. And we're replacing the values that were historically motivating inside the armed forces with our new values.
One of my viewers just texted us who wants to die for Biden and Zelensky. It's just so appealing. I mean, no American wants to do that. Does Tony Blinken? Does Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense, do they think American troops want to die either for wokeness or for Zelensky?
Lloyd Austin is a mystery to me. I've never met the man. And looking back on the years that he served, he certainly was an enormously, let's put it this way, he benefited enormously from the system that we have in place, right. Affirmative action and other things. And yet he's turned on the institution and seems to be turning on the American people and the country with incredible hatred and distaste. It's hard for me to fathom and imagine. It's even more difficult for me to look at senior officers who stand around and act as though this is perfectly normal. And when you say, what the hell are you doing? Their answer is, well, I've got orders. Wow. Orders to do what? Destroy the force?
Right.
Ruin morale, destroy cohesion, destroy discipline. We don't even have the authority today in the chain of command that we did 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago to take action when it's required.
What is the level of wokeness? It's hard for me to ask this with a straight face in the Russian army.
Yeah, that's a great question. The last time I looked at a recruiting video, I'd say about zero. Everybody there understands the Russian army exists to kill enemies of the Russian state. And all the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines understand that's their number one task. We go to where we're ordered and we defend the country and we kill the enemies of the state.
All right. We're now at the end of July. Where will we be by Labor Day in the war in Ukraine?
I'd be
still sending billions of dollars in cash and material there, or recognizing the folly of what we've done?
I'm glad you brought that up because most Americans don't understand, Judge. If you look at this $40 billion package that we passed back in May, almost universally, right. Only about half of that is for military assistance. It's still $20 billion, but it's enormous.
What's the other half?
Well, the other half it's unclear. It goes into aid and assistance that we would term nation building, support the Ukrainian state, humanitarian assistance, medical support, and so forth for the war. But most of the money for military equipment and military assistance really doesn't leave the United States. And this is what most people don't understand. When we say we're going to give the Ukrainians, for discussion purposes, let's just say 100 artillery pieces, we turn to the Department of Defense and say, send 100 artillery pieces to Ukraine. And they say, yes, sir. Then we send money over to the Pentagon to pay for the 100 artillery systems that we've taken and shipped. They then take that amount of money, whatever it is, for those artillery systems, and they turn and give it to the defense industries and say, give us replacements.
Right.
So it's kind of a circular system, because at the same time, remember, when all this money moves from Capitol Hill to DOD to the military industrial complex that we know as the defense industries, that money also involves donations for people on the Hill. That money involves making constituents happy, providing them with employment and jobs and so forth.
Which might explain why the Congress voted actually to give more money than Uncle Joe asked them for, because they're all looking for their next contribution. The late, great Justice Scalia used to say, it doesn't matter why members of Congress say they voted for anything. They only vote for anything for one reason, and one reason only: to get reelected.
Yeah, and that involves a lot of money.
The equipment that's on its way there, or that's there, this is not brand new, just built in North Carolina stuff, is it? Is this stuff that's been surplus, sitting in Warsaw or in a warehouse somewhere outside of Warsaw?
It's a mix. You know, some old things have been sent, but a lot of this is relatively new equipment. Remember, we're also depleting our ammunition stocks. So you've got to replace those ammunition stocks. When you talk about missiles, we've been saying the Russians are going to run out of missiles. Miracle of miracles, they've never run out. But that's because, for instance, if you shoot at an incoming ballistic missile, you have a Patriot missile battery, you're shooting 2 missiles for every one that is shot at you.
Right.
Well, that implies an enormous surplus of missiles on hand in peacetime. Well, we don't have that. In fact, we need a much larger surplus of those weapon systems. So the bottom line is no. And then the other thing to keep in mind, Judge, and I'm glad you mentioned this, we have been trying to get control of where both money and equipment is going in Ukraine, and the Ukrainians have not been helping us. And what we continue to hear about is enormous graft and corruption.
Yeah.
And the Russians, of course, are not stupid. They know what happens in eastern Ukraine. They know the country. They've been together for hundreds of years. So anything that's really new, like HIMARS that comes in, once it shoots or fires, it's a target. We know we've already lost 2 or 3 HIMARS systems very, very quickly. We lost the Caesar artillery systems that the French provide. Well, I'm not sure he could give you a different answer. Remember that the people we're talking about in Washington are universally ideologues. And given their ideological mindset, a discussion with anyone who disagrees with them is impossible. Anyone who opposes American policies in any form, particularly military policy, strategic policy, is by definition an enemy. I mean, this is the sort of, remember, this was the George Bush message: you're with us or you're against us. This is ridiculous nonsense. But we're not interested in winning anything. We keep talking about helping Ukraine win, but what does a win look like? Has anybody ever described victory?
I don't think that they can define a win. It can't be the removal of Russian forces from Crimea. That's not even militarily conceivable. It can't be the removal of President Putin from office. These are probably on the wish list of Victoria Nuland and maybe Tony Blinken, but these things are not realistic.
Well, from the neocon or globalist standpoint, if anything they do harms Russia and its leadership, it is by definition strategically positive for the United States and its allies. I don't subscribe to that view. But then again, people don't think carefully when they start wars about how to end them. And if you take the position that the only way the war can end is with the complete destruction or near complete destruction of your opponent, The war is not likely to end anytime soon, and sometimes never. Unfortunately, that's what we're dealing with.
Colonel, President Zelensky gave an interview in English to an American reporter. I don't recognize her, and I don't know the name of the network for which she works. They're on a train. We're going to run this in just a minute. There's a little bit of background noise from the train, but you can hear what they're saying. The essence of what he's saying is he needs, I don't know if he understands this properly. He needs to win Bakhmut, and President Putin needs to win Bakhmut for PR reasons. So take a listen, and then maybe we can dissect what he says.
Is this part of why you are fighting so hard in Bakhmut? Because a lot of military analysts will say that strategically it's not that significant.
Because that will be victory for him. He will.
And any victory.
Yes, he will sell this victory. He will sell this victory to West, to his society, to China, to Iran, to all the countries, to Brazil, to Latin America countries, not to Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. Of course, they really understand, from details, and they feel this dangerous because they neighbors. So, but he will sell it to his society. That was the first step. Now, wait a minute. I will have this issue with Ukraine. Then another step, another step.
Is Bakhmut militarily significant, strategically significant, or just emotionally, PR-wise significant?
I think most analysts that have looked at Bakhmut recognize that town is the keystone in the edifice of the defense of Donbass. That once that falls, because of its unique position, the road networks that run in and out of it, the rail lines, the various factory installations, mines, presumably supply depots and other things, it is very important. And that once it is taken, it's questionable how you build another effective defense line on the scale of the one that you had in Donbass. So I think it is very important, and I'm sure he knows that. As far as PR is concerned, he may not realize what a PR disaster he now has on his hands, because he's effectively saying that he's sacrificing tens of thousands of Ukrainian lives in order to convey the impression that, first of all, Ukraine can still win, but he argues to deprive Putin of some sort of PR success story. The Russians have a lot of capability right now, a lot of forces. They're not moving because they're not going to slug their way through the sea of mud that has famously stopped armies for centuries. They're waiting for that to dry out. They are going to attack when it dries out. He knows that. He keeps trying to build this argument for an offensive that he's going to launch that will preempt the Russians. No one has figured out how he does that through the mud. Maybe he has a super answer that no one else has got. And secondly, we're not really sure what kinds of forces he has at his disposal. What I sent you in terms of the map gives you a rough estimate, but those numbers for the Ukrainians are rather soft. The numbers for the Russians on the map are quite hard. It doesn't take a genius to figure out where the Russians stand on this, and they can slug it out very quickly when they decide to do so. So I don't think Putin's in any hurry, and I don't think he needs a PR victory.
Gary, let's put the map up. There you go. So, Colonel, how accurate are these numbers? I see 130,000 Russian troops. I see 60,000 Wagner forces. I see 50,000 Russian troops from Donetsk. I see another 50,000 Russian troops on the bottom. I can't tell what country that is. I don't know if that's Crimea or where they're coming from. The Ukrainian forces appear to be less than half of the Russians.
Yeah, well, understand the 130,000 at the top are forces in reserve, uncommitted. That's very important. These are
but are they there? Are they there where they're shown on the map so that they can move east if needed?
Yes, they are. And they're spread out, though. They're not concentrated into a tight little ball for obvious reasons. So they're spread out from perhaps the top of the map down to the dark part in the center. But they can rapidly move north and south, east or west, because the road networks that the Russians control give them excellent lateral routes to reposition forces quickly. Now, the 60,000 Wagner troops, the 50,000 in Donetsk, Luhansk militias, and regular Russian forces fighting with them, where you see the curving red arrows around Avdiivka and Bakhmut, they're fighting right now. In other words, those are forces that are committed to the front. They're not all committed, but most of them are. And those that aren't are certainly in positions to defend. Then at the bottom, where you have the 50,000, these are the ones that are not far from Kherson, which is off the map to the left. Those forces are not necessarily in contact, but they are in defensive posture. In other words, they're ready for an attack if the Ukrainians launch it. Now, the point of this map is to look at the Ukrainian side. These numbers, 80,000 at the top and 40,000 to the left as you view it, those numbers were good a few weeks ago. We don't know precisely what they are because you'll see the dashed blue lines.
What does that mean?
That means that the forces that were formerly concentrated, as shown on the map, have been reduced in size and capability because they've had to move them to reinforce Bakhmut and Avdiivka. In other words, we may be looking at now 20,000 down to the left and maybe 30,000 or 40,000 up to the right because the rest of the forces have been drawn off to fight. Now, Bakhmut has reportedly fallen, which means they no longer have those defensive positions and are going to have to fall back further to the west if they're going to maintain any kind of coherent defense.
Colonel, let me interrupt you. Is this breaking news that Bakhmut has reportedly fallen, or is this a repetition of what we expected in the past week or so?
I have only received a direct statement that came to me from my sources that what you see, the distance between the two red arrows around Bakhmut is closed.
Do those arrows mean that Bakhmut is surrounded?
Yes. In other words, it's completely
surrounded by Russian troops.
Yes. And the Ukrainian forces, we're unsure how many are left. Maybe there are 3,000, 2,000, 4,000. But effectively, Bakhmut has fallen because those troops cannot be reached. They can't be reinforced, and they're on their own. So we'll see what that means over the next 24 or 48 hours. Do those forces surrender? Supposedly, a lot of Ukrainian troops have surrendered, talked about being isolated, having no support, having nothing to eat, having no more ammunition, and so forth. So at any rate, the point is that the totals that we thought were available just 2 or 3 weeks ago for counterattacks really don't exist anymore. It's something less than what's shown on the map. Secondly, they have to move across relatively open ground in order to reach the Russian lines. Now, this is a wonderful opportunity for the Russians because, as we've pointed out in the past, you have intelligence, reconnaissance, surveillance platforms, manned and unmanned, from the ground all the way up to 30, 40,000 feet, low Earth orbiting satellites at 80, 90,000 feet. All of these can track with absolute perfect detail where the Ukrainians go. The result is that as soon as they are within, say, 10 or 15 kilometers of the Russian lines, they're going to be annihilated by artillery, rocket artillery, missiles, and conventional artillery. This is not a question of, well, the Russians have covered the road or the Russians have covered this. They've got the whole place covered. They're never going to get to the Russians. They're going to die in great numbers. So
Colonel,
why, in the circumstances, would the Russians move? You might as well sit and wait for what remains of the Ukrainian army to attack.
Wow. I want you to watch and listen to Senator Roger Wicker, Senate Armed Services Committee, interrogating the former four-star general who is now the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, and tell me if you think the secretary is credible.
with regard to your optimism about Ukraine having the upper hand. That is what you told me yesterday.
It is. Now, what I was about to say, Senator, is that Ukrainians have inflicted significant casualties on the Russians, and they have depleted their inventory of armored vehicles in a way that no one would have ever imagined. And so now we see Russia reaching for T-54s and T-55 tanks because of the level of damage that the Ukrainians have inflicted on them.
Reaching for those tanks demonstrates what to you, sir?
It demonstrates that their capability is waning. We've continued to witness them be challenged with artillery munitions and other things, and they're reaching out to Iran, to North Korea.
Do you believe there's a real chance for significant Ukrainian advancements between now and the beginning of winter?
I believe there's a chance, and we're doing everything that we can do to ensure that they have their best opportunity to be successful.
All right, Colonel.
Well, in October, November of 1967, General Westmoreland indicated in a public speaking tour across the United States that he was more optimistic than he had ever been. He was immensely proud of the way Vietnamese forces were fighting and was confident that we were nearing the end of the beginning of victory in Vietnam. Now, I've also listened to Dave Petraeus, as a general, tell us that the Iraqi army was in first-class condition and quite able to take over the mission of defending the new Republic of Iraq, that elections there were successful, that democracy was reaching Iraq once and for all, and that we were winning. I listened to, General Dempsey. I mean, just go down the list of all the generals, including Austin, when he was in active duty, tell us how successful everything was and how good everything was, only to discover that none of it was true. Now, I guess what I'm trying to say is that we have killed integrity in the military. It just doesn't exist. Remember that a fish rots from the head, not from the bottom. If you want the truth, get a soldier, sergeant, lieutenant, or junior captain and ask him, what do you think? You're going to get the truth. He'll tell you the truth, or she will tell you the truth. But once you move above that, the higher you go, the more unrewarding telling the truth becomes. Because everyone above you wants good news. If you bring bad news,
from my end of the world, I look at it this way. The Secretary of Defense was under oath. This is not a game. It's a felony to lie under oath. It's also a felony to mislead Congress if you're not actually lying, if the impression you're creating is erroneous. Does he believe what he's saying?
Well, first of all, Judge, how frequently have we brought anyone in and held them accountable for having lied to Congress?
The last person prosecuted for lying to Congress was the New York Yankee pitcher Roger Clemens, who supposedly lied about the content of his urine. The first trial was a mistrial. The second trial was an acquittal.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think
the government doesn't prosecute its own. We know that.
Yeah, well, if you're not going to prosecute, there's no accountability. Where there's no accountability, there's no performance. I don't think any of these general officers are worried in the least about being brought back and asked hard questions in the future when everything falls apart. So that's the first thing. Secondly, many of these people convince themselves over time that they have a duty to lie. It's my duty to go in there and support the president and his policies. No, it's not. That's wrong. But that's what they have convinced themselves.
But they, in this case, he is betraying the soldier, the lieutenant, the junior captain, the people who have a real feel for what's going on, whether they're Americans or not.
Well, this is absolutely true. This was true in Vietnam. It was true during World War II, particularly for the German generals who, after the war, were asked how they could possibly have continued to do what they did and lie the way they did. They were ultimately held accountable, not all of them, but large numbers of them, fortunately. But there's no sense right now in the officer corps that if you're a 3 or a 4-star, that you have an obligation to tell the truth that might be embarrassing to your superiors, whether they're 4-star superiors or political appointees or the president of the United States himself.
Here's an an interrogation before the same committee just a few minutes after the one we showed you. I don't align, I don't think you do, with the ideology of the interrogator one bit. It's Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas, who's a Lindsey Graham acolyte and loves war. However, he does accuse Secretary Austin of lying. Now, it's not about Ukraine. It's about the notification of the military action in Syria. But watch the back and forth between them and tell me if a rational person could conclude that Secretary Austin is being truthful.
To the issue of the strikes in Syria last week and Senator Wicker's line of questioning about the timing of notification to Congress. You said that you, quote, should have notified Congress earlier. These attacks happened against our troops, killing one contractor early in the morning Eastern time. Do you believe that you should have notified us that morning while we were voting on amendments directly related to this kind of attack?
There is no connection between when we notified you, Senator, and your vote. The chairman and I were testifying that morning as well. So as soon as we came out of testimony, we began work on crafting response options.
Secretary Austin, I don't believe you. I believe that your office specifically withheld notification of this deadly strike against Americans because the Rubio amendment, on which we voted midday, directly touched on exactly this scenario, not repealing these use of force resolutions if the president couldn't certify that Iran was no longer attacking us in Iran and Syria. That's what I believe. Nothing you can say is going to change my belief about that. And I got to say, I think I speak for a lot of my colleagues.
I just want to say, Senator, that is absolutely not true.
Maybe you didn't personally do it. But I believe entirely that people in your office did that. You have a vast legislative operation, as Senator Wicker pointed out. Do you really expect us to believe that they didn't know that we were voting on a Rubio amendment that directly covered exactly this kind of attack? I don't believe that. I believe there's a conscious decision made not to inform Congress because you fear that it might lead to the passage of the Rubio amendment, which would kill the entire bill.
Does Secretary Austin have a reputation in the military community for being truthful?
You know, I would like to say that in most cases, general officers are not thought of as people who are going to tell the truth about things that might embarrass them or their administration. I mean, you'll recall that when Lieutenant General, then three-star Dave Petraeus came back from Iraq in 2005 to testify on the subject of how things were going in the fall, that Senator Kerry said one of the few occasions, something that I could agree with that came out of his mouth. He said, we're going to discover that General Petraeus is going to tell us how successful General Petraeus is. And Kerry was absolutely right. So I think everybody in the military at lower levels knows exactly what goes on. Now, as far as the actual subject is concerned, you know, frankly speaking, every presidential administration knows that there are lots of people like Senator Cotton, or in other occasions, it may be Rubio, or it might be Schumer or someone else, is anxious to take advantage of an event to either embarrass or harm the administration or to force through legislation that might otherwise not pass. So I'm sure he's accusing Austin of something that probably happened, but doesn't mean I have much use for Senator Cotton. I don't have much use for most of the people on the Hill who have failed to tell the American people the truth about almost anything. So you're dealing with institutions that have essentially codified lying as an acceptable behavior. So it's very difficult for me to get excited over it. I wish that we could change what goes on in uniform, but that would take wholesale change in the institution, widespread removal of people to get someone who tells you the truth.
Here's an interview that CBS had. Now I'm taking it to the other side of the world with Admiral Sam Paparo, a four-star, who's the commander of all the naval personnel and equipment in the Pacific. And he's talking about, we're ready to defend Taiwan. And by the way, we're not talking to the Chinese.
If the U.S. and Chinese militaries can't communicate over a Chinese spy balloon, then what's going to happen when there's a real crisis in the South China Sea or with Taiwan?
We'll hope that they'll answer the phone. else, we'll do our very best assessment based on the things that they say in open source and based on their behavior to divine their intentions, and we'll act accordingly.
Doesn't that make the situation even more dangerous if U.S. and Chinese militaries are not talking?
Yes.
I guess the last answer is a truthful one, but the one before that, he almost has to say that whether he believes it or not. What is he going to say? The Chinese have a better Navy than we do. We might as well give up on Taiwan. He better put his retirement papers in.
It's troubling to me that an active duty 4-star is essentially behaving as a policymaker,
right,
and announcing policy. He has no business speaking publicly on any matter pertaining to policy other than to restate, if compelled to do so, what the current policy is of the President of the United States and his administration. That's not what he did. We have a huge problem with too many 4-stars. We have about 44 in active duty, and all of them view themselves as Caesarean figures, especially the regional unified commanders who think that they are
Caesarean as in Julius Caesar, not in as the surgery that sometimes produces babies.
No, they end up thinking that they're Caesar, and that's what you heard from him. What will you do when X happens? And the answer should have been, I will do as I am instructed to do by the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief. That is where my orders come from.
All right, this next clip will aggravate you even more. This is Admiral Paparo talking about the capability of the U.S. Navy to neutralize the Chinese Navy. Gary?
Is it your hope that the power of the U.S. Navy, the force posture of the U.S. Navy will deter a Chinese invasion of Taiwan?
It's not my hope, it's my duty, in conjunction with allies and partners, to deliver intolerable costs to anybody that would upend the order in violation of the nation's security or in violation of the nation's interests. The saying, which is si pacem para bellum, which is if you want peace, prepare for war.
Well, that's George Washington, although Washington said it in English, not Latin. If you want peace, prepare for war. But I get your point that an active duty military, 4-star or not, shouldn't be having an interview like this. We have many more of these clips. I don't know how much of this you can tolerate. It sounds like it was produced by the CIA. Sounds like it's propaganda.
Well, keep in mind that any admiral, if you ask him, are you ready and are you capable of defeating your enemy? He's going to tell you that he is. I would expect that. I would expect a general officer in the field to say the same thing. The only way to find out if that hypothesis is accurate is to test it on the battlefield or in a war at sea. That's not something he should talk about, but he said the right thing. And we are ready and we will fight if we have to. However, this business about deterrence is nonsense. His job personally is not to deter a damn thing. He's supposed to be ready to fight. It's not his job to provoke the Chinese, to intimidate the Chinese under any circumstances. His job is to be ready to fight. If he's called upon to do so, he's directed to do so. If he's fired upon, and that's it. And he should not be speaking extemporaneously on a whole range of topics. But this is more evidence that there is no one in charge in Washington.
I'll give you a little bit more evidence. After that interview, which took place in Guam, which, by the way, CBS describes as the size of Chicago. I didn't know that. I thought Guam was about the size of New Jersey, but it's the size of Chicago, according to CBS. So back in Washington, D.C., in the Pentagon now, I forget if it's a different reporter or the same reporter, but it's CBS. It's part of the same package. Interviews the CNO, the Chief of Naval Operations, and he makes a rather damning admission. Take a listen. Okay, well, his admission is that the shipyards that build big ships during his tenure as the Chief of Naval Operations has gone from the 30s down to the single digits, and the Chinese are building 2 ships for every one we build. He concedes that they have the larger Navy. But how insane is it for Joe Biden to provoke the Chinese into attacking Taiwan because of this fanciful belief that we can somehow defend it?
Well, first of all, a Royal Navy submarine captain who was crossing the North Atlantic was in the vicinity of a U.S. Navy submarine captain who was headed in the other direction, and they hailed each other. And the American captain said, "How does it feel to be part of the second largest Navy in the world?" And the Royal Navy captain answered, "I don't know. How does it feel to be part of the second best?" This sort of thing this goes on. There's nothing wrong with that. And he's telling the truth. In terms of sheer numbers of hulls, certainly the Chinese have lots more of them. But about a third of all the ships, and if you're talking about 300, that means that 100 are effectively Coast Guard vessels. They exist purely for coastal defense.
This is in our Navy or in the Chinese Navy?
The Chinese Navy. And that needs to be understood. But, when you get into these discussions about being ready to defend Taiwan or something else, it's very dangerous. At the outbreak of World War II in 1941, we had 11 oil tankers in the Pacific for the United States Navy, which was larger then than the Navy we have today. 11 oil tankers. Well, the bottom line was that the Navy, as soon as we were attacked, was supposed to sortie the entire fleet, fight its way all the way to Corregidor, Manila, and relieve the beleaguered American garrison and tow behind it 2 divisions of Army troops. Well, the 2 divisions of Army infantry showed up on the docks at San Francisco, but the Navy didn't take them anywhere because they only had 11 tankers full of oil. That meant that if they had used those tankers, they might have gotten halfway across the Pacific.
And they run out of fuel? Wow.
Yes. In other words, we didn't have enough. Now, when you look at the Pacific today, we have 3 major hubs for logistics purposes. They're well known to the Chinese as they are to us. I'm not going to enumerate them here today. But if those 3 hubs are destroyed, which is very easily done with precision-guided missiles, then you're out of luck with the Navy in the Pacific. In other words, I'm trying to say we're not prepared to fight the Chinese any more than we're prepared to fight the Russians. So instead of talking about fighting them, let's talk about what we need to do to be ready. Let's understand what the president is instructing us to do and to get ready to fight. We don't need to provide lots of details on how ready or unready we are to the public. And again, that's why these 4-stars should not talk this way. There's wonderful correspondence that went on between the various 4-stars in the Navy and ultimately Marshall and MacArthur in 1940-41, talking about these issues. But publicly, MacArthur said, "We are ready. We can hold these islands and we'll defeat whatever is thrown at us, bluff, bluff, bluff." Right. Privately, he said, "We're lucky to hold out for 6 weeks. We don't have enough of anything. We need to spend billions of dollars. We don't have enough of this, enough of that." And Marshall knew it, which is why they all told Roosevelt, "Don't embargo Japan. If there's a war, we're not ready." And what did we get? Well, they fought very, very valiantly. In fact, we fought extremely well in the Philippines up to the last bullet practically, but it didn't do us any good, did it? 12,000 men were captured and marched off to Bataan. And what happened to our Navy? We took a lot of hits, a lot of casualties, lost a lot of ships at the beginning. My point is that you've got to be very careful about what you say publicly. It's best to let the suits in the Pentagon talk. Don't send your 4-stars out to beat their chests. They make fools out of themselves. It's not their job.
And I think we have that clip I wanted you to look at. Take a look, Colonel.
Admiral Mike Gilday at the Pentagon. He is the chief of naval operations and is responsible for building, maintaining, and equipping the entire U.S. Navy. Is the Navy in crisis?
No, the Navy's not in crisis. The Navy is out on point every single day.
Is it being outpaced by China?
No.
Toshi Yoshihara of the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessments may know more than any scholar in the West about China's Navy. Why is China able to build more warships more quickly than the U.S.?
China has clearly invested in this defense industrial infrastructure to produce these ships, which allows them to produce multiple ships simultaneously, essentially outbuilding many of the Western navies combined.
After the Cold War ended, the shipbuilding industry consolidated, and many of the yards where ships were both built and maintained closed down. What do you see when you see China's shipbuilding program?
It's very robust.
Do we have enough shipyards?
No. I wish that we had more commercial shipyards. Over my career, we've gone from more than 30 shipyards down to about 7 that we rely upon on a day-to-day basis to build ships.
Wise to be discussing this, or generally known to us and to them?
Well, that's a known fact. We've allowed that whole industry to atrophy. Basically, the 7 shipyards are on federal welfare. They only build warships. They do a good job on those warships. Everything that Gilday said up front is exactly what he should have said as CNO. He did the right thing. That's what you say. What's true is different behind the scenes, but that's not a care for the American people right now. That's a matter for discussion with the president and key members of the Senate and the House who need to know the bottom line. I mean, they all need to keep their mouths shut. Now, here's some good news. First of all, we don't need all the surface ships, and neither do the Chinese. Warfare has changed. If you're putzing along as a surface ship within striking range of China, you stand an excellent chance of being disabled by any number of missiles. Because of what? Because the same ISR platforms I talked about before, from seabed to space, are going to find you. The waves are ruled by submarines. Our submarine fleet is the best in the world. It's excellent. I don't think we have enough submarines. That's my own personal view. As a former Army officer, that would be my first choice for strategic priority. Double the size of the submarine fleet. That's what gives us real power over the oceans. That's what can bottle up our enemy if we don't like him and prevent him from conducting commerce. That's number one. Surface ships, that's a distant 5th or 6th. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, good news, Chinese Navy is miserable. They have a huge morale problem. The Chinese don't want to go to sea. I don't blame them. I never wanted to go either. But the point is, the Chinese are really not interested in going to sea very much. Secondly, their submarine fleet is very new. They're very reluctant to send it great distances from China for fear they'll sink themselves. They might not get back. So the point is that quality makes a difference. We have the edge, certainly in the submarine fleet. We need to keep it and make it greater and stronger. As far as the rest of the Navy is concerned, all you have to do is pick up the newspapers and read about the Navy, the same kinds of things you're reading about the Army. We have huge morale problems with discipline, problems with recruiting, problems with retention, problems with finding quality manpower. But that's not something that the Chief of Naval Operations should talk about. He made the right decision, absolutely the right thing. But that's what he has to talk about to the president. And unlike Franklin Roosevelt, the president today or in the future. Yeah, I think we have the testimony in a public forum of a Ukrainian official essentially telling us that he was assassinated because he was part of the negotiating team back in March and April, and appeared to be, in their view, a Russian collaborator. Because, as he points out, that the team went there with no intention whatsoever of negotiating for peace. They were interested in simply dragging things out to buy time for Ukrainian forces to fight the Russians.
Well, are these rogue negotiators that are interacting with the Russian government on their own, or are these people that were dispatched by President Zelensky?
No, well, they were sent by Zelensky. And, then the whole thing, as you know, was subsequently suspended in Istanbul. And they dropped the pretense of being serious about negotiating a solution. But this man was identified early on and then essentially shot and killed on the grounds that he was a Russian collaborator. Now, I don't necessarily think he was. There are a lot of people in Ukraine who have been accused of this sort of thing simply because they opened their mouths and suggested that a peaceful solution was desirable.
Have there been or has there been the resignation or the firing of late of people around President Zelensky in his cabinet and in his personal staff And if so, what's behind that?
Well, someone who had worked in the defense ministry for Zelensky, who was in the cabinet, resigned in the middle of the allegations of corruption. Surprise, surprise. There was also an allegation that I don't know if it was he and his family, but another cabinet member who had vacationed somewhere in the Mediterranean, or no, I guess it was actually Florida, somebody said, while the war was going on, which of course was bad form given the desperate straits that the Ukrainians face. He seems to have resigned. You had this man Arestovich, who was the spinmeister or public affairs officer, media spokesman, defense ministry employee, who suddenly up and resigned, and then subsequently spoke and said he doubted seriously that the Ukrainians could ever win this war with Russia, and wondered whether or not it might actually survive the war. And then suddenly he, surprise, surprise, was blocked, and nothing further has been heard from him, though as far as we know, he has not yet been killed.
I would imagine he has a big target on his back, a former government spokesman who resigns and says we're going to lose.
I think it's probably a good thing he takes the heat off the rest of us who are on the death list.
I know they're after you, Colonel, because I've seen that stuff. I haven't gotten word that they're after me, but I trust if you hear that, you'll give me a heads up.
Well, if I'm still around, I will. Absolutely. If I suddenly disappear, you don't need any further confirmation.
All right, let's talk about the wish of President Zelensky and his military commander for tanks, and the absurd footsie that the Americans seem to be playing with the Germans over the tanks. Everybody wants these German tanks, and Joe Biden's getting in the middle of it. Do they know what the hell they're doing?
Well, I think it's pretty clear they don't. In fact, I think this is an important theme that we should address, because the mood in Washington has very definitely changed. The attitude of the Washington community, and that I'm talking about those people that are the leading senators, members of the House, cabinet officers, president, vice president, the mood of these people has clearly changed. I think they're sensing that this is a lost cause, that Ukraine is very definitely going to lose. And they're trying to figure out, how do we prolong the suffering? How do we prolong this fighting? They'll say publicly it's for the purpose of, quote unquote, harming Russia, which has been a complete fiasco and a disaster, because Russia, frankly, has not been harmed very much. Not at all, I would say, in substantive terms, economically, financially, otherwise. But I think that's part of it. The second thing is that they're now really goading the Europeans, the Germans in particular, into committing acts that, frankly, can be regarded legally anywhere in the world as acts of war against Russia. And I think the German government is sitting there saying, do we really want to supply heavy military equipment, tanks, artillery, all these things in great quantities to this war zone to help these Ukrainians fight the Russians? Are we not, in fact, becoming co-belligerents? Now, you and I have talked before about this.
Yes.
I don't think there's any doubt about it. We are co-belligerents, but I think the Germans are now interested in putting the brakes on that. So Schultz put us in a difficult position, because his representative at Ramstein last week at the conference for donors and allies that were willing to send things to Russia said that the only way the Germans would send any tanks, Leopard tanks, was if we sent M1s. Then we went through a series of comments from people in the Department of Defense, like this Mr. Colin Kahl, Assistant Secretary of Defense in OSD, who said, well, the M1 is a gas guzzler, and it has extreme maintenance requirements. It's too complex for the Ukrainians. It won't help them. The Leopard's easier for them to use, and the Leopard would be better.
Now, you have agreed with that, haven't you?
Oh, well, I agree with it, but not for the reasons that Mr. Kahl said. I mean, we've known for 30 years that the gas turbine engine's a catastrophe, both for reasons of fuel usage, but also because of the intake of all the dirt and sand and nonsense on the ground. This is an engine designed for the use of a jet at 15,000 feet, not for use on the ground. So here we have this turbine engine that's supposed to power this tank up and send it at 50 or 60 miles an hour towards the enemy. The problem is that historically, that's not necessarily what you need from the tank. I mean, tank doesn't have to go 50 or 60 miles an hour. We don't need to cover all that ground again, but the bottom line is that the M1's got a lot of problems. There's no question about it. I don't think people wanted to see this employed for the fear that they would be embarrassed by its performance. Not the gun, not the crew, but the tank as a whole, for the reasons we mentioned. So now the tables have turned. In order to get the Germans to send tanks, apparently President Biden said, well, we'll send 10 M1s. And Mr. Schultz responded by saying, well, fine, then we'll send 10 Leopards. Now, this seems childish and stupid, but I think we need to understand what's really happening. Number one, people have no faith in Ukraine's ability to win this war. We have been lying about what's happening in Ukraine between the Russian and Ukrainian forces for months. We have been exaggerating Russian losses, exaggerating Russian problems, and minimizing and obviating Ukrainian problems and losses. The truth is seeping out. You can't conceal it much longer. So the first thing is they know they can't win. In other words, we're losing the proxy war. Our proxy can't win it. Secondly, the Europeans are concluding that this is dangerous. You know, how far out do we stick our necks? And they don't have the military industrial power to rapidly produce anything. And I think this is enormously important. The lead time, for instance, for the AMRAAM missile, which is a very important weapon that's used in the F-15, the F-22, the F-35, and by NASAMS, this, brilliant, what I would call it, brilliant air defense system that we and the Norwegians have put together with Kongsberg. It's excellent for shooting down cruise missiles, helicopters, so forth. The problem is that from the moment you ask for a missile, the wait time until you get it is 32 months.
Oh,
that's how long it takes to produce these things. When you look at all of the missiles that we're promising the Ukrainians and the systems, they're not going to arrive in any short period of time. Now, the Germans are talking about giving the Ukrainians air defense systems like the Patriot, and they'll probably provide them with some missiles. But you'll go through those missiles very rapidly, and you just can't replace them. So the Europeans and we do not have the surge capacity to fight a major war. We just don't have it. The Russians do. Their factories are operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Contrary to popular belief, they're not running out of anything. They've got more of what they need than they've ever had. So all of this is dangerous. That's what we're learning from the Europeans now in private.
You stated at the outset of this last statement you made that you have sensed from public sources, and I guess from the people with whom you communicate regularly, a change in attitude on the part of decision makers in Washington. Now, I would imagine that what you have sensed is below the radar, and it hasn't yet bubbled up into the public consciousness.
No.
I mean, maybe Joe Biden's a bad example, but a hawk like Lindsey Graham, you're not going to hear him saying tomorrow the Russians are going to win and we ought to get the hell out of there, even though he may be whispering that to your friends and colleagues in D.C.
Well, see, that's an important point because I don't think they're whispering that. See, this is the great danger that we face right now. A couple of historians contacted me and they insisted they talk to me. And they walked me through all of the things that FDR did as president in the 1930s to effectively goad the Japanese into attacking our forces in the Pacific.
Right.
And we all knew, I mean, contrary to popular belief, the Navy, the Army, Marshall, the CNO of the Navy, Stark, all these people knew that the Japanese could, in fact, attack and destroy Pearl Harbor. And in the run-up to the war, FDR did several things. He put out something called the McCullum Memorandum and directed the Navy to deliberately violate Japanese home waters.
Yes.
And they did it with warships again and again and again. And he was told by the CNO, we could lose some ships. He said 2 or 3 ships is okay if we have to lose that. I mean, this is incomprehensible today, but that's what he said. And ultimately, they told him what the implications were, and he said, continue to do it. Ultimately, we know what happens. He leaves the fleet deliberately in 1941 in June in Pearl Harbor. He does not return the fleet to San Diego and San Francisco, where normally in Puget Sound, that's where the fleet in the Pacific was quartered, not in Hawaii. And the CNO said, Mr. Roosevelt, Mr. President, we're targets.
We're sitting ducks.
We could lose the fleet. Ultimately, you know the rest of the story. He deliberately did this. There are a lot of other things. He was sending as many bombers as he could to China, to Claire Chennault and the Flying Tigers at the time. He wanted to build up an air force there that could firebomb Japan from China. This is in 1939, 40, 41. We don't talk about any of these things. And what they said is what is happening right now looks an awful lot like what FDR did. Now, I personally don't think that that's on President Biden's mind. But then again, I'm not sure President Biden is much more than the man who reads the script that's handed to him.
All right,
I don't know what the people behind him are up to, but if you look at what we're pushing, this is what brings you to the next point. The Ukrainians are going to face this onslaught. They have already said they can't withstand it. They're going to collapse. It's already beginning, and the Russians haven't even attacked in strength. What do we do then? Do we play this game of Polish forces, American forces, Romanian forces, whatever else we can get, and push some distance into Western Ukraine? Do we then play the confrontation?
I want to play the Russian side of this from Foreign Minister Lavrov 2 days ago in South Africa. Gary?
Мы говорим о том, что там происходит на Украине. Мы говорим о том, что эта война, она уже почти не гибридная, а почти настоящая, которую Запад долго готовил против России, стремясь уничтожить все русское от языка до культуры, что было на Украине столетиями, и запрещая людям говорить.
Fair to say that he's speaking what President Putin thinks.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think not just President Putin, I think the majority of Russians. And it's a fair assessment based upon the things that we've been seeing over the last several years, unfortunately.
But this is a direct accusation by the internationally recognized foreign minister of Russia, pointing a finger at Washington, D.C. and the West as the prime motivators for this war. And then he uses this odd phrase, which you and I have discussed off air. He said, it's not a hybrid war, it's a war. What does he mean by hybrid war? What does this phrase mean?
This particular term was coined or invented by a former Marine major named Frank Hoffman. Very nice fellow. And I think it was really designed to somehow or another give the Marines justification for lots of Marine infantrymen to fight in future insurgencies. And what he was trying to talk about was today, hybrid war consists of men with rifles on the ground, media, external factors, other players in the international arena, game-changing weapons, all of this, instead of what we normally think of war as a more conventional confrontation with armies and air forces and so forth. And what Lavrov said, let's throw this hybrid nonsense out. We're talking about a real war. He's talking about high-end conventional warfare. It's not talking about nuclear warfare, but high-end conventional warfare. That's everything up to but not including nuclear weapons. And he's saying this is being planned against us. That's a fair conclusion on his part based upon what you see us doing, trying desperately to provide enough support to the Ukrainians. Remember, our support goes beyond technology, goes beyond weapon systems and ammunition. It's information warfare. We control the information highways. We are proselytizing for war against Russia. We are depicting Russia as this evil state, this nationalist state that rests on the foundation of Russian Orthodox Christianity. It protects its borders. It has an identity. Ergo, it must be destroyed. It must become like Western Europe and the United States, a country without borders, a country with identities that are being washed away in seas of illegal human trafficking, drug abuse, and so forth. That's what's at stake in their minds, and it's not an unreasonable assumption based upon what we're seeing. And he's saying, look, we're going to fight. And that's what we need to understand. They're not kidding, and we're not prepared for an all-out war. But
are the people in Washington who now are manifesting a change in mind, aware of the defiance and forcefulness with which these kinds of statements out of the mouth of Mr. Lavrov have been made? And are they prepared to counter it by sitting down and talking to him? Do they think they're going to counter it militarily? And do they not realize that that's World War III if they do?
Well, first of all, I think it's very clear that under no circumstances are they going to hold talks with the Russians, because that would suggest that they've made a mistake.
Right. It would suggest that we're pulling the Zelensky strings, which of course we are.
Yeah. So it's not, I don't see us doing that. You know, I was asked the other day by a journalist, what do you think we should do? I said, hold talks immediately without preconditions. We need to come to some sort of resolution no matter what. That in fact, was essentially what Kissinger said a few months ago, and then, of course, changed his tune. We're not going to do that. That's an admission of failure. No one in Washington ever admits that they failed at anything. Everything's a success, no matter how many times you fail. That's the first problem. I think the second problem is there's a lot of arrogance and self-delusion. I don't think the people on the Hill really understand what war means anymore. I mean, for many, many years, we had lots of interesting people on the Hill. Sam Nunn was a good example, but there were many others. Most of them had served in the military. A lot of them lived through the Second World War. They understood what you meant when you started talking about war. So when it came to Russia, or in those days, the Soviet Union, people made it very clear that's not what we want. Whatever we do, we must find a way around that, because we all know what that means. And they weren't necessarily saying it would be nuclear, but it would be so destructive and self-defeating, we don't want to engage in it. I don't sense that anymore.
What is your understanding of the latest numbers of military killed? Ukraine, Russia.
Well, Judge, first of all, this goes back to the fiction that we've been spinning about the war. We haven't told the truth about Ukrainian losses. It's becoming harder and harder to accept. We know from obituaries, we know from people on the ground in the hospitals treating the wounded. We know from the Ukrainians themselves who are posting things, comments on Telegram and sending videos. Ukrainians have lost easily 122,000, with absolute certainty, men killed on the battlefield. Secondly, they've admitted to roughly 35,000 missing in action, presumed dead. And if you go back to World War II and you look at German fatalities, there were almost 2 million casualties, or dead, frankly, from the Second World War in Eastern Europe and the German Wehrmacht. And a substantial chunk of that, hundreds of thousands, were missing in action, presumed dead. They were never recovered. We have to understand that the majority of casualties being inflicted on the Ukrainians is a consequence of artillery fire, not just hard shell artillery, rocket fire, firing thermobaric warheads. These are the fuel air explosives that utterly destroy a whole area. This is how you avoid going into buildings where there may be people waiting for you. You fire a thermobaric warhead into the building, it eliminates the oxygen. It's destructive, but it kills everything because there's nothing to breathe. You have a whole range of these kinds of explosives. The Russians have great quantities of them. They use them very effectively because they are also linking these in real time to overhead surveillance. This is surveillance, reconnaissance, intelligence platforms. So you're getting within seconds sometimes, certainly within a minute or two, accurate data to the artillery systems that can then fire. Keep in mind that the Russians can fire up to roughly 60,000 rounds a day. Ukrainians are lucky to get off 6,000 or 7,000 rounds a day. In other words, tenfold more than the Ukrainians can fire in response.
Can you address the, you've indicated 122,000 dead, 35,000 unaccounted for, probably dead Ukrainian. What do your sources tell you is the number of dead or missing and unaccounted for on the Russian side?
What we're getting from the Russians, as well as from some, the Ukrainian sources are just, unfortunately, when it comes to the Russians, they're just not believable. But we are hearing from people on the battlefield, depending upon where you are and who you talk to. The Russians have had somewhere between 16,000, 17,000 and 25,000 killed, and perhaps another 25, 30, 40,000 wounded. And people say, well, how could that be? I just explained it to you. You have overmatch in firepower on a dramatic scale, on a strategic scale. That's why.
When will the globalists in Western Europe and in the State Department and the Defense Department come to the same realization that the political class has in Washington has begun to achieve, that this is a losing fight and we have to change the mission?
Thus far, I haven't seen any evidence that there's any recognition of this. In fact, I continue to hear these disturbing comments that, well, if the Ukrainians have to fall back to the Polish border, then we'll fight a perpetual war against the Russians.
So this crazy president of Poland is going to send 100,000 Polish troops east over the border and is going to beg Joe Biden to let the 101st Airborne join them?
Well, I don't think he has to beg. I think there are lots of people that would push for that. And remember, you've got at least the equivalent of 3 armor brigades from the United States on the ground in Poland and down in Romania, plus the 101st, plus other units, formations, artillery, and so forth. Then you have the Poles, as you point out. They've now mobilized at least 200,000. They're trying to build up a force of over 300,000. That would probably support the projection of somewhere between 60 and 100,000 troops on the ground. I don't know about the Romanian side, but I know that there are elections scheduled in Poland for the fall. I don't know exactly how the government thinks, but the Polish population, and this is very important. We also discussed this map of Europe that shows the various polling data, and what you get all across Europe from the publics is a very definite preference for a negotiated solution to this war as soon as possible. There is no evidence that anybody in Europe wants to go to war with Russia. And I'm beginning to see that happen in Poland, where more and more Poles are saying, wait a minute, we're literally on the edge of the abyss here. If this war spreads, we will be destroyed.
Doesn't the German public want inexpensive Russian natural gas back in their homes to heat them for the winter?
I'm sure some do, but not yet. I think there's this belief that somehow or another they can get past this tough winter and be ready next year with their alternative energy sources. This climate change business is more than a program. It's a religious faith in much of Europe, and particularly with the Germans and Scandinavians. It's quite strange. And real data don't make any difference anymore. Again, everything connected with this war is emotion.
All right. I'm going to assume, or I want you to assume, that everything you've just educated us on is known by Russian intel and is known by President Putin. Does he come in with this slam bang invasion of 300 to 500,000 soldiers and finish everything off, or does he let the Ukrainians just sort of die on the vine?
I think he knows that he can't do the latter, because we will constantly try to resuscitate the corpse, no matter how bad it gets. We will rush in there, put it back on life support, try to get it back up on its feet and fight. I think he knows that the only way to rid Ukraine of this Ukrainian armed force is to go in and destroy it, and ultimately to replace this regime with something else, or wait for something else to emerge. I don't think he feels anymore, or for that matter, any of the Russians, they can trust anything we say. They know they can no longer trust the Europeans. They used to trust the Germans, and they actually, I think, believed Macron at one point in time. Now they know they can't trust anybody. I don't see great enthusiasm for a long and destructive war in Ukraine. Why would they be enthusiastic about that? Why do they want to kill other Slavic Orthodox Christians? I don't think they do. But the point is, they don't have much choice. And I think they will press ahead. The question is when. And I told you, I thought that the major offensives would begin sometime between the 21st of January and the 7th of February. We'll see if I'm right. There are others that say, oh, no, they're going to wait until March. I don't know. But I think it's coming sooner rather than later because of the things that you're pointing out. Why should they sit around and wait for resuscitation again? Why not just go in and put this thing out of its misery? but it's not going to be a lightning blitzkrieg. That's all nonsense. Warfare has changed. They have over Ukraine this large umbrella of intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance assets, and then they have this wide range of strike assets, everything from rocket artillery to jets to tactical ballistic missiles to long-range artillery. All of this is linked, and they're going to move their ground forces under this umbrella. They're not going to be surprised. Anything out there that looks like it could threaten their forces will be identified and struck quickly and put out of business as they move. So instead of this lightning blitzkrieg, it'll be a deliberate, methodical advance. It'll take a little longer, maybe a month, maybe 6 weeks, but it'll happen.
I know your field is military and not intel, but you have friends across the board. How long does it take the CIA to tell Joe Biden what you've just told everybody watching this show?
My experience with the CIA is not great, but from what I do know about intelligence officers and analysts, is that there's always someone there telling the truth. That's not the problem. It's the decision at the top as
Correct.
to what kind of intelligence they want.
Is the truth making its way through upper management and into the Oval Office? Probably not. Those people that go to the Oval Office are going to tell old Joe what they think he wants to hear.
Well, a good barometer for that is Mr. Burns, the director of the CIA,